my people, how you doing? I hope you're having a goddamn great day. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be trying to break down and replicate Freiburg's Christian Streich 4-4-2 formation, as well as the 3-4-3 formation that they do tend to shift quite effectively into every now and then. They do tend to alternate between the two formations throughout the course of games, as well as, you know, preparing for the games as well. Anyways, so we will be discussing that. You guys can let me know down below in the comment section. Firstly, the rating, if you like the system as well, that would be fantastic. The rating's out of 10, by the way. I do appreciate the feedback. If you guys have any, tips, and if you are a Freiburg fan, please let me know. Have I nailed your tactics? Whilst you're there, subscribe, like the video, that would be fantastic. Hit the bell notifications as well. But the most important thing is, I hope you enjoy it. If you don't, hit the dislike button. That's okay with me. But yeah, we're going to hop into the video and let's see what I have to say, really. So taking a look at the formation, of course, it is going to be a 4-4-2 holding. I've made no structural changes to it whatsoever. So therefore, it will be one goalkeeper, two centre-backs, two full-backs, two DMs, two wider midfielders, and then, of course, two strikers. Okay, so looking at the tactics. Now, the tactics are very weird. They're very different, and they kind of go against the grain of how most Bundesliga teams tend to set up, as well as how you would naturally set up a team like this. And to be honest, I quite like that. It suits and reflects a very Freiburg Christian Streich type, system and style of play, which again goes against the grain of things and is absolutely perfect. So I've set the tactical vision to wing play. They do tend to work the ball into those wider regions, stretch the play very effectively, overload in those wider sections very nicely, and create with either a cross or a cutback from those wider channels. So therefore, wing play suits this team and how they look to try and set up. Of course, I think it's a better fit than the pick and rush approach, as well as the counter-attacking role. They do tend to try and, not overly dominate games, but very effectively they can play out from the back. They can look to, retain possession, but that's not their number one key area or goal or focus, really. It's more or less retain the structure, retain the formation, make sure it's very hard to break down, and more naturally there will be holes that we can exploit as a team, as a unit, from the opposition, and more or less try and counter every now and then. So the defense and the defensive style is set to drop back. Like I said, they are more concerned with trying to maintain the structure, making sure it's very hard for the opposition to play through the central areas of the field, and therefore I think the team width should also be set to 30, looking to try and compact centrally, forcing the opposition into those wider regions, forcing them into crosses and cutbacks, and trying to create from those wider channels as much as possible. As for the depth, I've set it to 40, minimizing the space between the goalkeeper and the back line, often looking to try and cut out any potential through balls or over the top balls to try and exploit your opposition or your back line with the opposition forwards. As for the offense, the builder play I've set is long ball. They do tend to go long very effectively, getting those forwards in behind with the very effective fast-paced runners. And of course, out of the Bundesliga, I think they go long more often than not. So I think long ball best reflects and suits their team. But I will also say this, they tend to build up very effectively from back to front. So the long ball approach should be there, definitely. But you can also have that goalkeeper restart with the short passing into your centre-backs, who are also very effective with getting the ball, getting onto the ball, and then either switching play or having that nice big booming looping ball in behind for one of your forwards. So they are very capable of doing so. As for the transcreation, I've set it to balance. Now this helps because you can incorporate your three different transcreation levels, whether it's the possession based game, direct passing. Of course, that's probably going to be the number one use, really, getting those forwards, encouraging your forwards to get in behind. But of course, also the forward runs, encouraging your midfield to get nice and high, support the attack, and trying to create overloads as much as possible. But most importantly, with the balanced approach, they look to try and retain the structure and the formation at hand. So if you do turn the ball over, you don't have to have all these players out of positions and more or less create havoc for yourself. Onto the likes of the width, I have said they do tend to stretch the opposition quite effectively, creating overloads in those wider sections of the field. And effectively, with those overloads, it often leaves the opposite flank very much exposed and very much light on opposition players. So therefore, often looking to try and switch play into either the fullback or potentially the winger can be a very effective outlet for your offense. As for the players in the box, I've set it to a very good, very balanced 6, allowing for at least 3 players to be in and around the box. Mainly your front 2, with the occasional one of your wider midfielders would also break into the box. More times than not, though, it is going to be Grifo. He does tend to score quite a few goals, and also he's very good in this game. As for the corners and the free kicks, as always, it is set to 4. Okay, so starting off at the back with the instructions, of course, Muller or potentially the other goalkeeper, either or, they are both set to the same set of instructions, and that is going to be the balanced approach for both saving on crosses as well as serving outside of the box. If you are playing a mid-block, you don't require a goalkeeper to venture too far out of his comfort zone. You want him to be a bit more of a traditional base goalkeeper, making the saves on the line, and staying on the line as much as possible. As for the saving on crosses, however, there will be quite a few balls whipped into the attacking area or your defensive area, the attacking area for the opposition. And both Muller as well as the other goalkeeper, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but both of them are adequate when it comes to claiming and taking command of their box. Otherwise, they do tend to leave it to the defenders to try and deal with very effectively. And more or less, I think a balanced approach best suits both Muller as well as the other goalkeeper. Speaking of which, your backline, Lineheart as well as Ginter, the base set of instructions, essentially, apart from the interceptions, it is set to conservative. Now, it's a running theme throughout the course of this backline. They're not overly looking to engage and break the structure of your defense. More so, conservative interceptions helps keep the structure of that backline intact. As you'll see here for the right back as well as the left back, they have the same roles and instructions, but their attacking runs is set to balance. Every now and then, they can obviously venture forward. If the space is there, if the opportunity is there, they will look to try and create overloads and join the attack and support very nicely. The run type is set to mix. Now, they can look to overlap when they do get forward, or potentially invert a bit more and create those underlapping runs. You'll see with the instructions that your two wider midfielders have, it can, have that nice, good interchanging dynamic play to both the fullbacks as well as the wider midfielders. Of course, like I said, the interceptions is going to be set to conservative. You don't want your backline overly engaging with a potential interception or trying to create havoc in the front line for your opposition, because that can essentially expose and exploit your backline, and that can obviously lead to goals being scored. And then finally, for the defensive position, you want both your fullbacks to be able to stick to their positions again, not breaking the structure in those wider channels. As you'll see for the likes of Makengo, he has got the same role and instructions as well. Okay, so into your midfield, of course, you've got Hoffler as well as Eggstein. Now, one thing I did note was with this formation as well as the 3-4-3, one of the midfielders tend to, drop a bit deeper whilst the other looks to try and support the attack, getting nice and high up the field. So for Hoffler, he has got that more attacking role out of the two, but they do have very similar roles. So both of them will be set to cut passing lanes, of course having that very good zonal approach, trying to break up and stifle the play in those central areas as much as possible. The attacking support for the likes of Hoffler is set to balance. Now this allows him to have a bit more of a pragmatic approach. Again, if the opportunity to attack is there, he will definitely look to do it, but otherwise, he will look to try and support the likes of Eggstein in the midfield, again, trying to break up the play or trying to support with the build-up play going forward. The interceptions is set to normal, and of course, the positioning freedom is set to drift wide. Slightly different role to what Eggstein does have, but in an ideal world, you want both Eggstein as well as Hoffler drifting into those wider channels when your team does have possession, creating overloads as much as possible. But again, in an ideal world, that would be fantastic. But in this game, you only can really choose either drift wide, six position, or potentially be the deep line playmaker. So for the likes of Hoffler, drift wide is going to be essential. But on the defensive side of things, you want both your DMs to more or less try and create that shield, that barrier, protect the backline as much as possible. So therefore, cover the center is going to be required. Onto the likes of Eggstein, again, cut past lanes, yes. Stay back while attacking. So like I said, Hoffler, he's going to venture forward every now and then, but Eggstein, he is going to try and patrol that backline, make sure nothing's getting past him, and also just, sure it up a bit more. The interceptions is set to normal, and then of course the positioning freedom is set to deep lying playmaker. So ideally, you would want him to have this role as well as the drift wide approach, so he can also, support higher up the field when required, or just create those overloads in those wider channels, but you can't do that, so therefore his sole role in this side will be deep lying playmaker. And then, of course, finally, the defensive position is also set to cover the center. So, onto your left and your right midfielder, both Doan as well as Grifo have the same roles and instructions. Both are told and instructed to come back and help out the fullbacks on the defensive end of things, often looking to drop a bit deeper, help support the fullbacks with those potential second-man runs, or just trying to pick up the extra players in and around those wider channels. As for the transcreation, it is set to balance. Now, this is where the underlapping run or potentially the overlapping run of the fullback comes into play, because your wingers have a very balanced width. They can look to sometimes cut inside, other times hug the touchlines themselves. And it's a very basic system, but it works very effectively. They tend to, have these, not formations, but these like transitions and the automations, you could say, with either the one hugs touchline and the fullback underlaps, or vice versa, and it's very effective. For the two wider midfielders, you want them to often break in behind, penetrate the opposition's backline, allow for that passing option in behind, that long ball approach in behind. And often, the likes of Grifo as well as Doan, especially in those wider areas, they are isolated against the opposition fullback, where they can look to try and take them on, beat the man, whip in a cross, whip in a cutback, or potentially take them on and potentially whip in a shot for themselves. The interceptions is set to normal, with the support on crosses set to get into the box. Like I said earlier, with it set to 6, you have 3 players in and around that attacking area as much as possible. But more so, it is Grifo that does tend to get into the box more than Doan. I don't know why, I don't know how, but it is a fairly realistic approach. As you'll see for the likes of Grifo, he's got the same role and instructions as well. Okay, so into your front line, we've got Grigorich as well as Hoyler. Identical instructions. Both will be told to stay central, attacking those central areas as much as possible. And then the target man, the target approach, having the ability to back into the opposition, link up play very effectively, win the aerial duels, have those knockdown headers, allow them to play into the hands of what Grifo and Doan can provide for them as well. The interceptions is set to conservative. Like I said earlier, they don't overly look to press and engage too much with the opposition's backline, looking to try and keep their shape, keep their structure when out of possession of the ball. And then also the defensive support is set to come back on defense, looking to try and add another body into that defensive shape. As you'll see for the likes of Grigorich, he's got the same role and instructions as well. Okay, so onto the 3-4-3 formation. Now, for the longest time, the likes of Christian Streich, he didn't really overly enjoy playing anything else apart from a 4-4-2, but over the years, he's somewhat adapted his system and his teams to different shapes, different structures throughout the courses of games as well. And he has found a fondness to the 3-4-3 formation, and a few seasons ago when the likes of Freiburg were doing very well, they were second for like the longest time, they were mainly using this 3-4-3 formation, and they were absolutely killing teams on the break in transition very effectively. That backline, I think the likes of Nico Schlotterbeck was in it, a very good ball-playing centre-back before he was bought by Borussia Dortmund. And he was a key element to the success of the side. And it can also, in my personal opinion, I like this attacking outlet a bit more. It tends to stretch the opposition more, open up spaces quite effectively, and you don't have two strikers attacking the same areas as much. Of course, the likes of Hoyler does take up this right centre-back spot, so I would suggest you obviously sub him out if you are looking to morph into this formation throughout the courses of different games. Okay, so taking a look at it, it is a 3-4-3 flat. I've made 2 changes. I've dropped the 2 wider midfielders, more or less lining them up with the 2 central midfielders, as well as the wingers. I've narrowed them and dropped them down ever so slightly, turning them into 2 centre forwards. So therefore, it would be 1 goalkeeper, 3 centre backs, 2 wider midfielders, 2 central midfielders, 2 centre forwards, as well as 1 striker. Now, in terms of the tactics, I've made no changes to them whatsoever. They do tend to maintain their core values very effectively, but like I said, with a different shape, it does tend to get the best out of these players, and I think it's a bit more effective, but that's just my personal opinion. You guys can let me know down below. So the tactical vision is still set to wing play, defensive style drop back, of course, team width set to 30, depth set to 40, offense set to long ball, and balanced, of course. The width is still set to 85, as well as the players in the box is still set to 6. And then, of course, the corners and the free kicks, they never change. They're still set to 4. So, moving on to the instructions. The likes of Muller does have the same instructions, and that is obviously the balanced approach for the saving on crosses, as well as saving outside of the box. As well as the likes of Lionheart, Ginter, and Suzly, or Sly, or however you pronounce his name. Also, basically the same set of instructions and roles from the previous balanced approach, where, again, the interceptions is set to conservative. You don't want your backline overly engaging too much with the opposition, not looking to try and break the structure at the back. Into your midfield now, of course, Hoffler, he's got the more attacking approach like we established with the balanced style of play. The attacking support is set to balanced. The support on crosses is set to stay on the edge of the box. Obviously not looking to break into that attacking area, not looking to, break the shape of that midfield. You want them more or less central at times in case you do lose the ball and it is turned over. They're more or less going to be your first line of defense, essentially. The interceptions is set to normal, with the defensive position set to cover the center, as well as the positioning freedom in terms of the offense. Also still looking to try and create overloads in those wider areas of the field as much as possible. So he's going to be set to drift wide. As for the likes of Eggstein, a very similar role as well. but he is going to be told to drop between the defenders. And now this does help, creating that slightly lower role for him in the midfield too, as well as allowing him to get on the ball very effectively from the goalkeeper restarts as well. The support on crosses, just like with the likes of Hoffler, is set to stay on the edge of the box, looking to try and rotate the play, facilitate it a bit more, run the midfield essentially. The interceptions is set to normal, with the defensive position set to cover the center, and of course, the positioning freedom in terms of the offense is set to drift wide. So onto your two wingbacks / wider midfielders, both will be told to come back on defense. Obviously, they don't have that much support in those wider areas, so you need them patrolling up and down either flank. The chance creation is set to a balance, with allowing them to sometimes drift more central, allowing them to create overloads more centrally and link up very nicely with the midfield, or potentially they can look to try and stay on the wider channels of the field, again looking and waiting for that potential switch of play into the left or the right channel, depending on which side you're looking to try and overload. The support runs is set to get behind, still looking for them to penetrate the opposition's backline, looking to try and work into that space that is obviously going to be vacated. And then finally, the interceptions is set to normal, with the support on crosses set to stay on the edge of the box. As you'll see for the likes of Makengo, he's got the same instructions as well. Okay, so into your forward line, we've got the likes of Grifo and Doan. Again, very similar roles, in fact, identical. Both are set to a balance, with allowing them to drift centrally or potentially out wide, linking up very nicely with the fullbacks / wingbacks. The attacking runs is set to mixed as well. Again, it can allow for them to break in behind, potentially with that long ball over the top, or they can also look to play as a false nine, linking up nicely with the midfield, the likes of Hoffler and Eggstein, potentially also looking to drop off of the opposition's back line and potentially also pull centre backs and defenders out of position. The interceptions is set to conservative, with the defensive support set to come back on defense. As you'll see here for the likes of Doan, he's got the same role and instructions as well. Finally, onto the likes of Gregorich. Now, a very similar role to the balanced approach. Stay central and of course be a target man. He is the only aerially dominant player in this front line, so you do require him to use his physicality to link up play very nicely with the forwards in and around him, obviously. The interceptions is set to normal. You do want him to have a bit more bite to what he obviously possessed with the previous instructions set to conservative. Sometimes he can look to press every now and then. And then finally, the defensive support. The defensive support is still going to be there. You still want him dropping off of the backline, helping support the defensive outlet as much as possible. And there you have it, my people. That is how I would replicate Freiburg's Christian Streich 4-4-2 as well as the 3-4-3 tactics in FC24. Out of 10, I would give these instructions a solid 6.5. The 4-4-2 is how do I describe it? The offense going forward is not the best, but in terms of the 3-4-3, it really does suit that. So if you had to balance it out and put them together, I would give it a solid 6.5, 6.5. You guys can let me know down below what you would rank and rate the system out of 10. And of course, whilst you're there, hit that like button, subscribe if you are new, and of course, until the next time, I hope you have a damn great day. I'm out.